So here we are again, talking about coaching and psychedelics. Today with a bit of a special episode, I would say, because Yannick at least is here as a hybrid between host and also the guest, being the guest. And we are here with Nigel and Marcel as well. And today's episode goes about the white paper they wrote together. And it's about coaching and psychedelics. And if it can be a beneficial partnership. So I'm very curious about the discussion we have today. And I would say we start with a little introduction so that our listeners know with whom we are here today, even though, Yannick, you are quite famous already. So, but it's always good to hear something new. I suppose there will be always changes in your biography as well. So I would say start again with introducing yourself before we go into the discussion.
Yeah, I haven't been on as a guest since what's the last 16 episodes, where this is number 17 that we're recording, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, some of my thinking always updates itself. And well, is it a beneficial partnership? I mean, we're 17 episodes in, so I think we all agree that it probably is. But what's exciting is that this paper has been years and years in the making. It's been 4 or 5 years. This is the third group, and the third group was the charm, and we actually managed to get it to a publishable format, and we're about to submit it to the International Journal of Evidence-Based Coaching and Mentoring. So this is a huge milestone because as people who listen to this podcast know, we've been thinking about this for some time. We've been exploring how these two fields can come together. Where's the intersection? How can coaching and psychedelics work together? And we've been interviewing all of these people about how they put it together. But this paper is important, I think, because in order for it to be a credible practice, I think it would do well to ground itself in the academic literature. And this is my way of moving into the psychedelic space professionally, has been through the academic literature. So I feel especially connected to it because when I read the literature on therapeutic applications and clinical applications, for me, my coaching and my positive psychology lens kicked in and thought about all of these people that don't have diagnosable clinical conditions and how beneficial psychedelic experiences with some preparation and some integration can be. And I'm like, well, but in order to talk about it with my professional community, I better ground it in, something that's a bit more real than my experience or my thoughts or my ideas. And that's really what we wanted to do with this paper. Draw the links between, hey, this is the argument, let's lay out the argument, and we're going to talk you through what the argument is and what we've done here, and really start exploring through an academic lens of, does it make sense? Why does it make sense? Why is it a good argument? Why is it a logical conclusion that coaching and psychedelics make sense together? And then throw out a lot of these ideas of how it could work and some of our ethical considerations. That I think is really important for coaches to ask themselves. And all that really is a call for a lot more research attention. There's a lot of research attention into clinical applications. Well, why isn't there more research attention to people who are doing relatively well and they want to expand and learn and grow, right? And why isn't coaching more recognized as an ideal way, I think, to help people do that? Depending on what coaching is. So all of that just to kind of lay out the landscape again so people know what they're in for. Who am I? I'm Yannick. People who listen to this podcast have probably gotten to know me by now. Maybe this is your first experience of this. Who am I is a big question. I'm help people think, grow, expand, navigate big questions in their lives and careers. That's probably the theme. I like holding space for people to challenge themselves, figure out who they are and how they make choices, and then make choices courageously so that they can get the most out of this life experience in this, limited time that we have in this bodied experience. That's mainly through coaching, increasingly so in recent years in supervision. I've been training coaches for many years. I teach coaching at Cambridge now. I used to be the program leader of the MSc Coaching Psychology at the University of East London. I run trainings here and there. I run a lot of groups, supervision groups. And since 2018, I've been interested in coaching and psychedelics professionally. That's still kind of a side hustle. I love my psychedelic work, but it's maybe, it's a small part of my professional activity, but one that I'm particularly passionate about. Just recently, a couple of weeks ago, I presented in Vancouver in the World Congress of Positive Psychology and really opened this topic up to my professional family, which was very cool to see the feedback. So there's a lot of excitement about this. What else could I say? I think I'll leave it at that. I like cats. I'm in Berlin. I've got a little daughter who is 1.5 years and keeping us on our toes and always challenging us to think in new ways about life and living. And I guess that existential and that positive psychology lens, that's what I'm bringing to my work and to my thinking. That's me in a nutshell. Nigel, do you want to go next?
Sure. Like you, I find this subject of who am I a very challenging one sometimes to answer, to have to put a description on who one is. But yeah, I'm Nigel. I'm based in the Netherlands. I've worked in the fields of change making and social justice. I've worked in the corporate sector, but what's my focus at the moment is very much focusing on working as a consciousness guide and ceremony leader and psychedelic facilitator. 3 years ago, I founded Magwe, which is a practice for healing and growth, which is based here in the Netherlands. And a component of that, or the primary component of that, is leading fully integrated psychedelic coaching programs. Another hat I have on is also being in the governance team of the Guild of Guides Netherlands, which is the professional association of facilitators of legal psychedelic experiences here in the Netherlands. So I am very motivated and interested in the realm of altered states of consciousness and the benefit that they can bring all of us. I have been very honored to be part of this working group over the last years. I know we're going to go into more detail as to the history of our participation a bit later on. But I bring 3 decades of work experience that really has found me working from everything from the boardroom down to the bush. And I think that's one of the things that I have bring to this work and enjoy combining within this psychedelic space is the variance of people that we meet on our journeys and how to walk more interesting and whole paths together. I'll leave it there and pass over to Marcel.
Okay. At first, thank you for having me here and for organizing this podcast. We finally made it. We planned it for quite some time, and now it's time to introduce our paper. So where to begin? I also want to keep it short, just the basics. I'm Marcel. I live here in the beautiful city of Trier in Germany. I begin to study psychedelic research and also to experience it in practice in 2017. It was when I discovered a video in the internet which says 5-MeO DMT, the magic pill to enlightenment and God, it was. And
quite an attractive punchline.
I never heard about psychedelics before. I mean, obviously LSD, but I didn't know. I just knew about the cliches. It should be dangerous. People jumping out of the window and stuff. Which obviously is totally wrong. I discovered this video was a lot into mindfulness, and got interested, watched the video, and there were references to research, and I went into research. So I walked through a lot of studies, did a very deliberate look into it, and then I got curious and wanted to test it by myself. Did it with my best friend. He supported me. He was still or already experienced, and then more and more fascination grew. I got to know of the Mind Foundation, which is also located here in Germany, which do research and practice. And I got to know the Coaching and Psychedelics group run by Yannick that time. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, actually. And then the idea came up to do a white paper together. And so, it was a long process, but as I said, we finally made it. And
it's not published yet. we might have another year to go.
Oh no, I don't think that. But maybe some months, some minimal adjustments. But it will work out. Yeah. One last thing, maybe I'm not a coach, but I give advice to people about from my theoretical background as a student of psychology. I didn't name that. Here in Trier, connected a lot of psychedelic research into general psychological models, and have a lot of research ideas and also ideas to have practical rooms for psychological integration of deep psychological learning states. So I want to launch that in the next year. Yeah. So maybe on another point in this podcast we can talk about it more if it suits. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for the introduction. And great to have you all here. So I'm very curious about the project. And Yannick, you already set a bit of the sphere for this white paper, I think. So for me, it would be interesting because at least 2 of you had mentioned that it's a project that runs already for a few years. So when did you really come together? I know you all from the Coaching and Psychedelics subdivision of Mind Foundation, where we met a few years ago. So I'm curious when the project really started and when Nigel and Marcel, at least when you decided to hop on and get involved in this project.
Yeah, it's been a long time in the making. So a very first instance, and I think I talked about that in episode 1, was when I and my colleague Libby Davey got together and started talking about this. We then started the first online symposium, just getting coaches together and start talking about this. And from that, this idea was born, at least for me, that this needs to be written up in some way. And me and Libby had talked about it, but she's not that interested in the kind of academic process of it. She's a practitioner and just an engager of life. She's a force of nature. She's amazing. That was not something that she was interested in. So I looked around, and the very first instance, there was Rosie Peacock and Chris Pickering, who we got together and wanted to solidify this a bit more. Rosie loved writing, and Chris had just started studying existential coaching. So there was a lot of interest in just kind of bringing stuff together. There was Andrew got involved for a little bit as well and kind of contributed some ideas, but then it kind of moved away. Rosie disappeared for a little bit. I had stuff to do. So it never really got the kind of momentum that we needed to really start writing it up. The idea was already clear in my head back then. But as it often is with me, I have something that's clear in my head, and then to get it out is a whole process. And it was the same at university when I would write papers. I would have the argument clear in my head, and then I just needed to formulate sentences around it. And that usually took ages, and I procrastinated heavily. So a similar thing happened here as well. I thought with a group it would work, but it took longer because this is not a for-profit thing, right? This is not something that's gonna solidify the career in this or that way. It was always a labor of love, and it was an important one, I think, for the field. But there's only so much time you can invest, especially when now there's a baby involved, and the baby is not a baby anymore. So it started around 2018 with the idea. Then around 2019, 2020, I think, we got involved in the professional, what started as an interest group at the Mind Foundation, which seemed to be a good home for exploring coaching and psychedelics with other practitioners. And so Nigel and Marcel were an active part of this group. There was then stuff happening with the Mind Foundation. They decided that the aim that they want for coaching within the Mind Foundation would be to institutionalize coaching and really draw very clear boundaries towards therapy and other one-to-one approaches, so that we can develop evidence-based methodologies that can then be scaled probably in one of their centers or just in general. That's the direction that Mind wanted to take, and we discussed it in the section, and it was clear to us that that's not where we want to develop. I think it's valuable as a pathway, but the section I felt needed to be more inclusive. I wanted to hear everybody, and it was really great to bring such a group of people together. I mean, there was a core team of about 6, 7, and then there was around 30, 40 people who expressed interest, who occasionally showed up to meetings. And it was great to develop an ethical framework, a conceptual framework, and really discuss it with so many different coaches. And yes, it's difficult to draw clear lines between coaching. Then coaching there's such a huge gray area. At what point does it become therapeutic? At what point does a coach need to refer? And there were many coaches in this field that were really kind of therapists, but they called it coaching, or it was difficult to draw the line. And I think it's important that we hear all of those voices. But through these discussions, a lot of ideas developed. And I think at some point, not sure, Nigel, Marcel, I think at some point I just put a call out and say, I've got a very, very rough draft of ideas for this paper. It deserves to be out there in some way. Somebody's got to write it. It might as well be us. Do you want to be involved? I think I put a call out, didn't I?
I didn't really remember how it was, but we had several like subsections, I remember, and one of them was the white paper, another one was ethical guidelines, then we had methodologies, integration. It was, I think, in my opinion, quite well organized, yeah, but it's hard, as you named it, as Mind put the clear boundaries of, let's call it institutionalization, or
that's what Henry called it.
Yeah, what Henry called it. Yeah, it was too difficult to then agree on very, very specific, measurable definition of coaching. Yeah,
we're miles away from that.
Miles away, and I also think it's not the nature of coaching to define it so clearly. It has to be defined, of course. I'm not just do it. Don't do an apprenticeship or a training or something. Definitely not. Yeah, and we defined in our paper clear and, in my opinion, specific enough standards that have to be done to be a good psychedelic coach, in our opinion. So maybe we can get into that later a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. Because we had sat down and we figured, well, in this professional section, what would be the working groups? What are the projects that we want to drive forward? And the white paper was one of them because it was the oldest standing. And then you put your hands up to want to be involved.
I also remembered you put in like, I don't know, 10, 15 pages, like different Word documents. And it was like, oh, I don't know where to begin. And my mind was so scattered. And I think it's a great effort that we've done. We had so much interesting information and put it down to such a concise and coherent paper that we finally made. I must say there were really times over the last year where I was very skeptical if we really made it. It was hard, and as you mentioned, you become a dad, and Nigel and me, we also had tons of stuff to do, and we did it like for no earnings and in our free time, in some afternoons or evenings or at the weekend. And wow, we are here and we did it again.
There must have been a moment. It's like, oh shit, Yannick's having a baby. Oh, yeah. Is he gonna come back? No. Oh no! Oh yay! Oh no! Oh yay!
Congratulations, but oh shit!
Congrats!
Yeah, and that's been one of the most challenging things, Marcel. You just alluded to it, was the bulk and the amount of information that we actually sourced during this whole process, and this is whenever you write such a paper, you have to be quite brutal at times, but we've had to, sometimes sacrifice elements that we were all maybe in our own ways attached to. And fascinating information there, but you can't put everything in. Otherwise, what is already a substantial paper, as we once saw, would have been 3 times as long. So it's the wealth of information that we gathered was such a beautiful part of this process.
I saw the list of literature, and I was asking myself, did you really read all that? Amazing. How did you do that?
Collectively, we probably did read a lot of that. As it is, some references you use because they've been used widely to put a certain argument forward. With academic papers is great because you can read an abstract, and that abstract in the beginning, every scientific paper is structured in the same way, and it's designed so that the abstract really is the heart and the core of the paper. Why this paper? What have we done? What were the results? And what are some future steps? They're all in the abstract. So if you read an abstract, which is usually 200 words, if that maximum, right, 100 to 200 words, then you've read the paper. Right. And then you can jump to specific sections in the paper to check into the details. If you want to use it as an argument for something that you want to say, then maybe jump to the section that makes that point and dig into it a little bit further, be a bit critical about it. Right. That's part of the literature review. So definitely. Yes, there's 2,000 words of references. I was flabbergasted when we did the final word count. No, more, even almost 3, because the actual paper we've got down from like 18,000 words to like 6,000 words, with in the end the help of an editor who really helped us to be very brutal with, cut this out, cut that blip off, really get to the core of the argument. But there's a substantial amount of references, which I think is part of this, because that's part of what we want to do, is to get as many references out as possible. Like, here is relevant literature that is related to coaching and psychedelics.
Yeah, and it's also important to have different evidence. So we have a lot of studies. We have also clinical studies. We have some observational studies. And as you said, Yannick, the more evidence you have, the more proof you also have. And as we have in the what we can call positive psychedelic, in intersection, these kinds of studies, we don't have, or we have very few, very high, how to say it? There are there's scarce research done in this area, but in the clinical field we have nowadays quite a lot compared to 3 years ago. So we have to collect a lot of data, clinical and also non-clinical evidence, to have a strong proof. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a big part of why I think it's important that we have that sort of paper, because yes, there's 3,000 words of references, but really the research base into coaching is non-existent, right? There wasn't a single paper we could identify that was about coaching and psychedelics, right? There's a really good amount of research now into clinical applications, and that's what we're basing it on. Right. What about people who are, I mentioned that in the beginning, right? So there's a good amount of research. It's a pretty solid research base now. I mean, it's only been going for 20 years, but 20 years is little in research terms, but still there's a good amount of evidence, enough evidence for MDMA therapy being recognized as a breakthrough therapy by the FDA in the United States Food and Drug Administration. 30 years of work by Rick Doblin finally got to a point to go through all of these regulations to make this available. That's amazing. Psilocybin's being recognized as breakthrough therapy for treatment-resistant depression. That's huge. That's major. And that's came out of the research evidence that we found. There is a little bit of research which we mainly wanted to put out in the world and make the connections to coaching, that is about non-clinical populations. So people who are not suffering with a diagnosed clinical condition. So what are the effects of psychedelics for just a random sample? People who have never done psychedelics, like that first Griffith study, 2004, 2006?
2006, yeah.
Yeah. So these were people that had never done psychedelics. And they are free from any diagnosis of clinical conditions. And what are the effects of psychedelics? That main paper for me that launched the idea for this paper was 2018 meta-analysis of positive psychological themes of clinical research, right? What is the psychedelic research, and what can we draw out that is about well-being and what's right with people and resources and strength and, positive emotions and optimism and mindfulness and openness. So that paper really for me was the basis of, there's research there. There's elements of other research that we can extract and make the links to how can people grow from this? What can people learn from this? And people who aren't ill or need fixing or treating of some sort of disease. So there is some research around what are the positive elements of this? What are the elements that can help people grow? But there was absolutely nothing on coaching. So I thought if we make the links between, it's not just that I put my coaching and positive psychology lens on and I'm like, well, what about all the, not normal people, but like healthy normals, as in the Gandhi terms, right? What about people who are relatively resourceful and relatively able to cope with life and work? What might they get out of this? And really make those links. And then coaching for me is an ideal way to hold space for someone to prepare for this, set intentions, help somebody learn about psychedelic experience, and help somebody integrate a difficult experience. That's not really that different to other coaching approaches, depending on what you see as coaching. We can discuss that a bit later. But that for me was the crux of the argument. And this is where we need to create more research, right? Coaching as a methodology or as a process that can really work super well in the context of preparing for or integrating psychedelic experience. And there is zero research. But what we can do is say, why do people come to psychedelic experiences? And why do people come to coaching? And is there enough overlap to say, actually, if people get this out of coaching and people get the same kind of stuff out of psychedelics, then maybe they work together conceptually. And if there's research around all these positive benefits from psychedelic experiences, and that's the kind of outcomes that people would want from coaching also, well, then we should at least see if they make sense together. There seems to be a solid argument, or at least a hypothesis, that these make sense together. So hopefully we can lay the foundation for other people to say, oh, that argument is solid, let's test it. right? And that's hopefully where people will take this paper and do more experimental studies. We called it a white paper because there isn't that kind of methodology and research and, lots of good data that we can work with and interpret. This is a conceptual paper that builds the argument that these two fields make sense together. And now please go and do some experiments and see where you can take this. So hopefully this will build the basis for future research and then future practice.
Interesting for the listeners, what is the scope of coaching and psychedelics in the white paper for you? So Nigel and Marcel, maybe you can have a quick scope or explanation. What is coaching and psychedelics? Because Yannick already teasered it a bit, but I think it's interesting to really understand what it means working with the substances or not. So can you explain a bit more on that?
You want to go first, Nigel?
It sounds like you're already there.
So let me start at just a random point. For me, coaching is like in the combination with psychedelics to what comes up is integration. Yeah, really to have these deep experiences, these deep, as I call it, existential or psychological learning experiences, where you go into hyperplastic states. You're very open and curious to new experiences, and then to get coaching, as Yannick introduced it, to like non-clinical interventions to really foster it into your daily life. So integration not only as doing 1 or 2 sessions, as it is practiced in the clinical area, where you I don't want to criticize it, but sometimes it seems to me, okay, people draw some mandalas or journal a bit, make a new meditation habit. But what is really integration? Integration is more than only integrating the experience, but change your life, transform yourself. And there you need coaching, where you can months later or maybe years later come back to your coach that maybe supported you at the session in a legal manner, or at least is your integration coach, and then helps you with specific daily problems to get in contact with your resources that you maybe discovered in your psychedelic sessions, that you are more than your idea of yourself, that you have a lot of potential or wishes, that what you want to be, you rediscovered your true values, your true self, and how to apply that, for example, in your work life or in your relationship, in direct communication, in difficult conversations, or when you're stressed, when you have tons of work to do, how to sustain your self-contact and to be in this open and grounded state that you had in the psychedelic sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then building on that and taking the circle backwards, because we often talk about some of the best integration is preparation. We also go into the support that coaches can offer people in the preparation phase before undertaking any form of psychedelic experience. So the work that takes place from a coaching perspective beforehand, which can incorporate both the practical elements of how to prepare oneself, but also the drivers, let's say, behind it, and how that dovetails with the coaching trajectory, let's say, that you may be on at that time. We also talk a little bit as coach's sitter in the areas where that is applicable, and obviously the restrictions on that from a coaching perspective as to how that would work if the coach also fulfills the role of guiding the psychedelic experience as well, and the ethical considerations behind that. So we've really got this whole phased approach, and we also touch briefly as well onto the concept of how to coach clients who may be also undertaking their own microdosing protocols.
Yeah, and before we go there and different kind of modalities, I think what you both just said just beautifully illustrates one of the biggest challenges of writing this, which is the range of coaching. Coaching isn't one thing, right? Some coaches work very much on the facilitative spectrum, sometimes called pure coaching. I mean, most coaching schools that I know, they would teach coaching as how it's been often defined in the coaching psychology literature, as something that is facilitative, right? The coach doesn't have an agenda, the coach doesn't teach, the coach doesn't give opinions. The coach holds space and creates a space where somebody else can learn, but they don't give answers. They ask questions, right? They help you figure some things out, but not by taking you by the hand and guiding you through a process. They're not giving you the answers. Maybe they guide you by the process so that you can find your own answers. And then we transition into the other spectrum, end of the spectrum, which is coach me through this, right? The kind of coach that really takes you by the hand and gives you answers, the more mentoring, consulting, teaching kind of coach. And there is a spectrum of coaching that offers suggestions and advice and knowledge. The coach tells a story, the coach shares an experience of theirs, right? And especially in the preparation process, that can come in super handy, and many clients would look for that. They would expect their coach to say, look, intentions are important, settings are important. Here's a book I want you to read. Here's a conversation that you should have. Here are a couple of questions that you should be asking your sitter or your guide or the retreat center that you're going to. So there's a lot of advice that a coach can give. In my books, that's not really coaching. That's more like a mentoring or a teaching or consulting or, but also under the banner of coaching, that is definitely also coaching. So I've kind of made my peace. I got trained in a very facilitative way. So for many years, I was like, no, this is coaching. And what other people are doing who give advice and mentor or consult or teach, they are not coaches. But they call themselves coaches, so they are coaches. It's an unregulated profession. So the challenge here is that, well, if you're a coach who brings in a lot of their own experience, if you're a coach who's also a guide, or if you're a coach who's offering a lot of knowledge and wisdom, that's going to be really helpful. If you're the kind of coach on the other end of the spectrum that holds space and doesn't give answers, but instead of saying, here's what you need to know, to, well, how could you find out? How could you learn? What could you read? What have you considered? Who do you know in this space who has knowledge, who you could learn from? Right? I, as a coach, I don't need to give any answers. And I personally, I don't want to work in this way because it puts a lot of responsibility on me. And also everybody's journey is different. So I operate from this facilitative, existential kind of person-centered lens. But other coaches, they really don't. And they do fantastic work. So that's the range of coaching. And it's difficult to write a paper with such a broad definition, or rather hundreds of definitions. So I like to kind of have a balanced view on it, especially at the beginning. So hopefully what we can bring across is that, hey, coaching isn't one thing, but here are some elements that they tend to have in common, right? Help people learn, expand, grow. And you can do that in many different ways. And some of these ways of coaching, they're very conducive to psychedelic work, and others maybe less so. Right. So the line gets blurry to therapeutic work because especially high dose psychedelic experiences, they can go really deep. They can open up a lot of doors. And as a coach, how far are you willing and able to go? How deep a space are you willing and able to hold for a client? And what kind of methodology, what kind of theoretical lens might be conducive to working with psychedelics, or rather around psychedelics, as I like to call it, right? Because we can talk about this later, but like I don't think at this stage it's safe to work as a coach while somebody's on the experience. We can open that a little bit later, but yeah, the range of coaching is enormous. So writing a paper, taking that into account, was a bit of a challenge.
I would like to bring in 2 points. At first, So we also mentioned in the paper that because coaching is such a broad range, it's important to make a contract between the coachee and the coach before a session, or even preparation and integration, which comes before and after the psychedelic session. That it's really clear what the coachee expects from the coach, and also what the coach can deliver. That there are clear expectations, boundaries, and maybe if there's no agreement, the coach should also be aware, because coaching is such a broad and free, rather unregulated field, that the coach can refer his client to another coach. That he's aware that there are lots of other coaching styles. And one main reason for successful coaching is when the relationship between both is good matched. So this is very important. And the other point is like facilitation under in a psychedelic session. Should a coach be able to, or be allowed to, facilitate a psychedelic experience? You also mentioned that, or put on that. And in the paper we said the critical point is that the coach, first and foremost, it's not that it's not illegal what there has been done, like from the country that it happens in, but also the second most critical point is that there's no intervention from the coach when the coachee is under the influence of a psychedelic substance. Maybe we can discuss that a bit, because there's also like there are voices that say, okay, but what about MDMA sessions? Let's be an exception.
Let's talk about that, right? Because
sessions.
Because there was something inside the group as well, because Nigel, for example, sits with people through psychedelic experiences. I came in with, well, there shouldn't be any intervention, and actually when the coach is present, it can be tricky, because the client might want to start talking about stuff while they are still under the influence. And while they're under the influence, well, they're considered vulnerable, right? Because they're so open and so malleable. The brain plasticity is high, as you mentioned, Marcel. But Nigel, it was really important for you to put that element in. And we did include in the paper the coach as sitter, right? Not just preparation and integration, microdosing, there was a note on it. We could write a lot more about it, but we know relatively little. But what about the coach as sitter? Because we know from within the community, there's many, many coaches who are also present during the experience. And there's benefits and pitfalls with it, right? So when I say don't coach anybody during an experience, I'm saying don't intervene in their experience. And I think that's also something that Nigel subscribes to, right? But like, if you're there during the experience, there's so much more that you can pick up on during the integration work.
And the basic question is, what is intervention? Where does it begin? Where does it end?
Because sometimes, like when you're in a session, an intervention is already like taking a hand when the client needs a hand or just some support. So, in how far do you influence the journey of the person by doing that and going into patterns or feeding patterns that they already have, etc.? Or like only how you design the room. So maybe there are objects they are very clinging to, or they have an aversion to. So how does that influence already the journey up front? So I think Nigel and I, we're very much on the same path also with like facilitating, guiding. And for me, it's also always the question of where does it start? What is coaching then? And maybe the other idea of how important is it to your clients that they know how blurry the lines are? Or is it just like, I need help. I don't have an a diagnose, so I don't get therapy, I look for something else. But is it for them important that you have very clear, that's coaching, that's mentoring, that's maybe sort of therapy? So what's your experience on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think it really comes down to the agency of the client in this, and establishing that very early on in the coach-coachee or guide-guidee relationship as to what this is and what it isn't. And being clear from the perspective of the coach and guide what it is you offer, and be very, very upfront about what that is and what it isn't. And then that goes into the hands of the person who's making the decision to walk with you on this path or not. And they can take the decision whether that's what they want. I feel that's a really important component. So there is clarity that from me, you will get this and you won't get that. Or for me, you will get this and this and this, and this is how I work. And then you build that relationship together. And I find when you're going into such states of, especially if you are guiding at the same time or facilitating, the coaching relationship in all cases is a very intimate one, let's say. But then when you're going into this level, when you're guiding people through, let's say, heightened states of consciousness, you're going into extreme positions of vulnerability, that the approach that you use has to be very, very clear. Mm-hmm. And I've lost my train of thought totally where I was going with this, so I think I'm going to stop.
I'm happy to jump in there because you just put a lot of thoughts up, right? For me, being part of the experience, I mean, I think it shows here that I come from coaching first and foremost. And I've had some psychedelic experiences, but like that was never in my professional conscious realm. So I've been a coach first, and then I stepped professionally into psychedelics. I don't spend most of my life in that world. And probably at least half, probably more than half of the guests we had on the podcast come from the psychedelic field first, and then they add coaching skills into that. So it makes sense that more of the people who come from that world would want to also hold that space during the experience. So me coming from coaching first and foremost, I draw quite clear lines there. You know, there's coaching skills that I would not apply during the experience. I think that's unethical. You know, I can't say I'm not tempted to see, you know, because some of the conversations I've had during an experience, you know, a good couple of hours in, it's already beyond peak. And some of these conversations I've had with people really, really changed something for me. And part of that was their opinions or their questions or their guidance in some way. And I can't help but wonder what would have happened if that person was a professional coach who's not tripping, who's aware of their assumptions and projections and transference and emotions and committed to not guiding me or not judging me or not, you know, influencing where my thinking is going, other than, you know, facilitating that my thinking is going somewhere, but not attached to where it's going. So if that wasn't a friend of mine, but someone who's a professional, well-trained in those things, I mean, I can imagine that to be profoundly valuable. But at the moment where we're at now professionally, I think that's risky to say the least. So I wouldn't go there. But there's being with someone, but making a clear distinction between that's me as a person holding space for you to have an experience, and this is me as a professional coach helping you, advancing your thinking or integrating these experiences, or how in practical terms can I take these insights that I've had and build them into new habits or build them into how I change my life now? How do I navigate my career? How do I navigate my relationships now that something profound seems to have shifted? You know, it really pained me to see so many people having an experience and profound shifts in consciousness, profound insights and learnings. And then 6 weeks later, they fall all into their old patterns. And this is where I think in the beginning, the most valuable point to apply coaching is to take those insights and really integrate them into practical ways, into how you live your life and work your work, whatever you want to use it for. But during the experience, that's why I'm kind of put some distance, because I think when you're holding an experience like that, there's another set of skills that you need. There's some overlap, of course, but I would want to have a lot more training and a lot more experience holding space for people's experiences. And for me, I'm just at the moment not interested in, and I don't have the time to go through all of that process. So I concentrate on what I'm best at, which is the coaching part. So I'm happy to be around the experience so that somebody knows, oh, my coach is kind of close, and I can have the conversation once the experience has faded out. But yeah, many coaches hold space, and that's the conversation that I also want to have. Coaches, what are you doing when you're holding space? Are you coaching, or are you a coach who's at the moment acting as sitter? Where's the line? Is that also very blurry? Because in reality, I think it could get very blurry, and then it gets very complex. So at the moment, early steps, I make a clear distinction there.
I like what you brought up there. You said about kind of going around the experience. So what you do is going around. And then you've also got them people who maybe do the entire line. So those that also have that role of coach and sitter or guide. And I think if you're doing this one, then also you as the person responsible, you have to maybe be wearing very much having the distinction between the hats you're wearing. So when you are doing your coaching element, you're doing the bit that's around. But when you're in the middle of the line, so when you're actually in the psychedelic experience, you are there as a space holder and a facilitator, and you're not, and you aren't coaching. You're holding the space. So if people are verbal, you're just holding that space for that for the enablement of that exchange. But you're not having that interchange, the exchange that you maybe would be having if you're at the bit that goes around. So the preparation or the integration. And this is where another important point that comes up in the paper that we touch upon is the point around ethics. And that's an understanding the ethics that boundaries all of this and the responsibility you have when you are working in this field of what you can do and can't do and maybe should do and shouldn't do.
Yeah, I really hope that they find some space in the paper to print the code of conduct that the professional section has. Liam, thank you so much, Liam Farker, took a lead on that. There's so many valuable guidelines. They're not necessarily grounded in evidence, but they're based on other ethical codes and adapted to the coaching context. So there's a lot there. We mentioned MDMA earlier, and I think that's really worth bringing up because when I presented on the topic a couple of weeks ago at the conference, I had several people come up to me thanking me for talking about ethics. And I thought, how could you possibly not? I was just like, that was the most commented on thing from people that came to me. And that there was a lot of response, but most of the people that commented on something said, thank you so much for talking about ethics. Because I had a slide that just said ethics. And then, there's a lot to talk about, a lot more than I had time for. But that was strange. And the other question that I got afterwards, we didn't get to record it. Maybe I'll put the presentation out via the podcast. We'll see. But there was a question afterwards that didn't make it on the recording that asked a similar question to what you said, Julia, which was no intervention during the experience. But what about MDMA therapy? In MDMA therapy, the therapists are active, guiding and intervening, and there's a whole process during the experience. Why wouldn't that be the same in coaching? And I think it's a fair question. For me, the answer came actually relatively easily, because one thing is that these therapists are usually way better trained. They have much longer training, and they're already therapists, and then they do specialized MDMA training. So there's years of placement, and there's years of training, there's years of their own therapy, so that you can sit with your own emotions, and that you learned to know yourself, to your trigger points, so that you're not reacting to something that gets triggered in you, but you really, in a much more controlled way with the client. It's much safer for the client to work with somebody who's got training to this level. So that's one big difference. Not saying that many coaches don't have that level of training. Many coaches in the psychedelic field, they have a background in therapy, but most don't. So I'm not sure if most, there's no numbers on this, but like, if you don't, then, you know, that's much more risky. So that's, I think, is one reason why not to intervene in the experience as a coach, if you're not particularly trained in that. And also the work with MDMA therapy is usually around trauma. And so it's a vital part, it's an essential part of the process to revisit the traumatic experience with under the influence of MDMA, because you can reposition yourself towards it. That's the whole work, right? And I think in coaching, that's not the work. You know, if it's important to revisit experiences with that kind of mindset, then I don't think that's coaching anymore. I think that's very clearly therapy.
But I think it's oftentimes you start at another point. Maybe somebody's coming and not searching real therapy, but let's say they say, I'm not really connected to my emotions. I would have a look there. And I feel like in my youth or my childhood, I can't remember so many things. So I would love to have a look there. Yes, you can maybe think there could be trauma somewhere because she's not remembering things, but you don't know. And they are clearly not diagnosed, and they're clearly a coaching client. And if you then go there, the possibilities are very high that during that session,
it opens
from
up.
A coaching client, it becomes a therapy client.
Yeah.
And so I think, like, from my own perspective, I see that more and more coaches in that realm already realize that it is good at least to have some therapy background in whatever, to just be able to hold that space in that moment, and maybe then need to refer somewhere else, but having more than only the coaching thing, because especially in that realms, it's so likely that they go into things that you're normally as a coach not equipped for.
Definitely, at least some training in crisis intervention or like stabilization. Yeah, that you can, because it's really it's really different if you invite someone or lead someone into let's stay with that and really look into it, what is coming up, or give some impulses, or you kind of stabilize the person by, I don't know, by sometimes distraction. Changing your focus to the outer world, or giving something to drink, or hold hands. To have some kind of reassurance. Yeah, definitely.
I think this is most relevant if you're a coach who's also there during the experiences. When it's outside, when you help lead into the experience and then pick up when the integration starts, I think that's less relevant, right? Because I think we can, it's important that we have someone in our network, that we have a couple of people on hand that we can refer to, because I agree, it's much more likely that these doors open. When a traumatic experience reveals itself during the experience, and I happen to be there, I wouldn't want to intervene, because that's not been agreed. We haven't agreed that would be done. And I need my clients' informed consent, whether they want to engage in the work where I am actively guiding a process, like we would in trauma work. So as that's happening, I'm just going to have to let it happen, and then we pick it up then. Because at that moment, they're not able to make an informed decision whether for you to engage in that sort of work. When somebody's coming out of an experience, chances are there's, a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, at the very least, a good couple of hours before the integration starts, depending on how somebody relates to that. So if somebody's had a really difficult, challenging experience and the trauma doors have opened, I would hope that wherever they do that experience, there's already help available for that. There's already someone in the retreat center who will be able to have a crisis intervention. But if somebody's coming to the coaching session a couple of days after their experience and they haven't received that and they're in crisis, then any coach in or outside of psychedelics will hopefully know how much of a space they can hold. You don't need to have a therapeutic background to hold space for somebody in crisis. Everybody can do that. Just be there, just be with them, just try to make sure that they're okay and not at risk of acute harm. and then signpost where they can find the help that's necessary, right? And if you're not trained in crisis intervention and you're completely out of your depth and all of these emotions just broke out and there's maybe a psychotic episode, which can happen. There is some risk of it. We cannot minimize it, even if we do good screening. So, but what do you do then? It doesn't matter if came from a psychedelic experience or not. Other experience can trigger this too. It happens to coaches. So what do you do then? Well, make sure that person is not in acute risk of harm right now, of hurting themselves. They're not driving home while they're in super distress. And then stay with them as long as you need for them to not be in danger, and help them to find the right therapist or the crisis intervention or the Samaritans. There's so many services available that I don't need to have all of these skills in order to help someone, right? I need to know how far I'm willing and able to go. And if I have that sort of training, then I can apply it. But if I don't have that training, then I can find people who have that. So
yes and no.
Okay. Yeah,
Marcel,
I also want to say something.
Go on.
So I'm not sure if it's a disagreement, but it's like an addition that solves the problem.
I'm happy to be disagreed with, by the
way. No, it's not because I want to be kind, but it really matches with what you said. Okay, keep holding to the contract, but I would add to make the contract before in the preparation phase, so that it is it is spoken about what to do in an emergency, and really to talk about also situations that are very, very unlikely, but that can happen. Yeah, real emergency, yeah, like a psychotic episode or even some physical. I don't know if the person gets unconscious or something, which I never heard of at a psychedelic trip, but it's very, very important, in my opinion, to speak about it in the preparation phase. Yeah. And make a contract out of it. Yeah.
And I think what I would like to add is that it is, for me, it's a bit different if you have somebody who's fully conscious and has a dissociative phase or psychopathic episode or whatever it is, than being under the influence of a substance. So I think it is slightly different. And for me, it is very good to have interventions that I can then do to bring somebody back, and knowing that they might react in a different ways than somebody would react in a normal state. And just having that on hand. And sometimes it's not only being there. Sometimes it's really important to react in a real good way.
Definitely.
Oftentimes like trauma-informed reactions, or really like emergency reactions. I had people who fainted, who really went so far away that they were not there anymore, who dissociated so much. And then it's important to have these things by hand. But yes, I work in a different way, of course. I'm aware of that can happen, and I know that I can handle it. And maybe that doesn't happen to a not normal coach who's only doing normally integration or preparation.
Yeah. And I think the crucial difference, what you mentioned, Julia, is these kind of interventions are more stabilizing, as I said before, and they are unlikely to unfold some effect over the trip. It's just an acute intervention. It's holding hand. It's something that you say to reassure the person. Okay, you're already here. You're still here. Your body is okay. It's everything fine. It's not that you want to persuade the person or kind of change deep belief systems or something in the person. Yeah, it's a crucial difference. Yeah, I think we really have to make this a point. Yeah.
And just quickly, Nigel, it goes to show that most of what we refer to here as complex and challenging is referring to being there during the actual experience. So another good reason that starting out in this field, probably good to draw the line and then as you're creating more, as you're building more skills, more training, more knowledge, more experience, I think it's less and less risky and bold to be present during the experience. But there is a different set of skills that I think is required when you're sitting with someone during an experience. Nigel, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it's fine. I just picked up kind of 4 points that come from this discussion that I wanted just to touch on. One of which was the importance of, for all of us that are working, whatever stage of the phases you're working in, is that we aren't just ourselves, are we, as an individual coach or guide? We are part of a network. So it's really understanding what you bring, what you can do, what you can't do. And then also being that having that referral system around you of experts who can come in and support the client with the need that they have if you're unable to facilitate it. And then that also brings us on to this point of the range of experience that can happen to someone who is undertaking a psychedelic experience, and the range of need that they bring to having that experience. So one of the things we touch upon on the paper as well is this kind of the 3 categories, let's say, of people of engagement with psychedelics, though ranging from the recreational to right through then to the clinical application, and then this whole window in between of what we're referring to as the betterment of well people or the healthy normals. And in that, you've got this enormous range of need or of want. So I think that's an important point just to bring up. And then there's also, when we're talking about psychedelics here, but there's a whole the range of psychedelics, the range of I'm going to call them medicines in this point, probably shouldn't, but the types of psychedelic and the experience that you then have with that is very different. So the experience that you have, for example, in guiding someone or someone who's working with MDMA is going to be very different than someone who's going in for a session or a retreat with psilocybin, for example. So again, that adds another thing to the balance. And the last thing I just wanted to touch upon was also, we can't forget that this is a deeply human experience. So it's very important that we have protocols in place and contracts in place, very important. But this is a deeply human experience, and there has to be that very much that human element as part of this process. It can't just come down to list of do's and don'ts. It has to be an iterative experience, process.
Yeah, it's a relational process.
Very much so.
And that makes it even more difficult to create a methodology with, a clear process that we can, for example, teach an AI to do. It's just so embedded in the quality of the space that we're holding. I believe that that's what gives coaching that kind of magical bit. And that's very difficult to recreate, and it's very difficult to scale. So, that's why at this point, for me, yes, I think in some way we're building the basis of like the starting point, perhaps, that could result in integration methodologies using coaching skills. But, who knows where this is going to go? At the moment, I just want to ask a lot of questions. Hopefully, this will be the start of a conversation. By no means am I claiming that this is the definitive guide to doing coaching in preparation or integrating psychedelics. But here's some ideas of how that could look like. Here's some research that's relevant. Here's an invitation to create more coaching relevant research, test some of these ideas. And also draw on the experience of the collective experience of our think tank, of our interest group, turned professional section, turned to community of practice. Here's how people work with this. And, this is aligned with coaching psychology. And this is maybe what's not aligned with coaching psychology, but it doesn't mean that it's less valuable. So here's a lot of stuff that I think will hopefully help people think about this in new ways. Hopefully inspire other people to be part of that conversation, not just academics to be part of the conversation, but disseminating the knowledge or the ideas in a way like this podcast, or probably publish a director's cut with some of the stuff that didn't make it in. There's a lot of words that we didn't use for the actual publication. that I think could be really helpful, right? Get the framework out there, get the ethics code of conduct out there, let people engage with it and let it evolve over time. Where's it going to be in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years?
And I would love to see where your thoughts are going regarding the future, because I stumbled upon an Instagram post this morning, and it was about a trial in the US where a company used psychedelic assisted therapy for the employees to see what benefit it can have. And I think that it will make its way more and more into this direction. So I would be interested what you think are the advantages, disadvantages of going into that field, and what would be necessary to make it possible to bring it into, let's say, the corporate world.
I think there are two implications in that. The first is that it, just as you mentioned, psychedelics made it into the business world. But the second implication is that psychedelics made it more into society. Yeah, it's more publicly available, and this is a huge topic, which I am very, passionate about passionate in thinking about it. I think that it's important to have some clear guidelines, for like societal integration. Or do you want to talk about the business area first?
I'd love to come in on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if I'm not jumping in, Marcel.
You can jump in first, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So for me, two things came up when you asked us that question, Julian. The first one was the topic of consent. So it's wonderful. There's a thought to bring this into a workplace wellness environment or coaching environment, but the consent of everybody that's going to take part in that, I think, is of paramount importance. But then it comes back to this whole concept of preparation and preparing people for what they're going to be entering, because maybe, what are we going in to do here? And it could be that we're all going into, we're going to use psychedelics to brainstorm around this idea that we have within our organization. Wonderful. But we know that when you do work in these altered states, that way more than that comes up. So are people prepared for the unknown? And what are the support systems in place to cope with that? Because we know it's not just a linear route to get from A to B when we do this work. So it's a fascinating area, but you're stepping into very vulnerable and personal territory often when we're doing this. So what's the protective cushioning, shall we say, around you as an employee when you go in do something like that? And are you prepared? Are you prepared, and are your colleagues prepared? And is your workplace prepared to support you with doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think dose plays a huge role here. Because the higher the dose, the more the uncertainty about what's going to happen now.
True.
And I reckon larger corporations, they're not going to be embracing that kind of certainty, because in a way you're opening Pandora's box. Because how well do you know your employee really? How well does that employee really know themselves? To make a decision whether, this is going to be a creative, inspirational team building exercise versus this is going to be climbing the mountain of pain for 1,000 years. We really just don't know, and we can't predict it. So I think with larger corporations, that's not really going to be a thing.
But was a larger one.
Was it? Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And were they talking about? Do you know what dose they were talking about, Julie? Was this like doing a a full-on psychedelic experience at a high dose, or was it a microdosing brainstorm or something?
No, I mean, I don't have really the details, but it was MDMA and psilocybin assisted therapy.
Okay.
So I suppose it would have been the high dose. And for me, it was more the question, like, what is the aim also of the corporation to incorporate that? Because is it then instrumentalized, like mindfulness as well, to make the people more efficient and to be less sick at the workplace? Or is it really about helping develop a person as their personality is and discover themselves, and also taking into account that they might leave the company because they realize this is not my path anymore.
You got to be really confident as a company really to offer that.
So definitely, if you offer it as a corporation, you have to consider a return on investment. So definitely this is into play, and I'm very hesitant because of that. What I really like is to transfer the effects of psychedelics, let's say just self-insight into practical application in different life areas. As I mentioned before, business, private life. And I think, so what I'm aiming for is to probably in the mid of next year launching a project where we build up these existential learning rooms, where we have like deep experiences with psychedelics also in the Netherlands or in Portugal or other places where it's legal. And then to have an ongoing integration that is way more than the integration nowadays, where you have 2 or 3 sessions, and to really talk about how to concrete and long term apply these insights and enhanced self-access that you experience after psychedelic ingestions, or psychedelic experiences. So I think there has to be really some maybe companies or instances that have or places, spaces, let's say spaces, this is way more neutral, where people can come, have psychedelic experiences, and are supported in a coaching related manner in long term when they want. So I think it's also a process of the next 5 to 7 years, optimistically.
And I think this is where the paper comes in again, because the larger corporations, any corporation really, will probably want and need to create some level of certainty that this is going to have this or that effect. And we will need a lot more research. That's what they base this on, what they base the kind of certainty on, because in this Western world, that's still the best way of creating knowledge that we know of. Not watertight, but certainly it's an accepted field, right? So when we create more research around psychedelics-assisted coaching or coaching-assisted psychedelic experiences, maybe with a focus on leadership or authenticity in leadership or creativity or inspiration, I mean, that's already starting. A colleague of mine, Hanane, she did a dissertation around leaders' experiences of psychedelics and how that's affecting their well-being and their experience of leadership. So I can see that have profound effects on how a leader is showing up in the company. I can see it have profound effects on where a company is going. I can also see the dark side here in terms of there's power involved when an organization is offering this. And for those who listen, I put offering in quotations, because when someone with power is offering something, it may not feel like an offer that you can refuse. So I've seen pictures of Esalen, the retreat center space in San Francisco, just outside. And there was under new management. There was this whole article. Nobody mentioned any psychedelics, but that was very clear that picture there was an ayahuasca setup. And I'm like, I can definitely see tech startups taking their leadership team to Esalen to do an ayahuasca ceremony. And it'll probably be really difficult for someone who's critical about it or doesn't quite feel, but they want to belong, and they don't want to say no because they might be jeopardizing their career if they said no. And that's something very ethically concerning. I think that's very wrong. So there's a lot of things to consider if you thinking about introducing or offering or inviting your staff to take part in psychedelic experiences. It's critical to really think this through, and I think it can be risky. So I think the future, there will always be companies who will be doing it. Some more ethically and some less ethically. I'm hoping that the people who want to introduce this into companies, they work with a good coach who really helps them to think about it. And I think it would help to work with a coach who knows a little bit about psychedelics and their effects and maybe the research. And again, it's super important that we create more research so that hopefully people who are considering offering these tools, if we wanted to call them that for the moment, in the corporate space, they're probably more tools than medicines. In coaching, they're probably more resources and processes rather than medicines to go heal. Undoubtedly, many people in the corporate space need some healing in order to do better work. So again, can be a blurry line. But that's where I see it going. Hopefully, ideally, there's going to be a lot more research and a lot more interest, but hopefully with some hesitation and some critical engagement in what are the pros and the cons.
And maybe this just comes to that point that what we're talking about here is one option for people who want to grow, right? It's not the option. Yes, it's a thing that's gathering a lot more attention at the moment, but it's certainly not for everybody. And maybe this company this hypothetical company we're talking about, it's just on their list of possible options that, you could go and have existential coaching, you could go and have this, and you could go and have that, because it's more just what is right for Marcel is not right for Nigel, and it's not right for Julia. So it's just having the suite of available options for those of us that want to be better versions of ourselves.
And I also want to state here that I don't see psychedelics as just suitable for a context like therapy or coaching, or as you named it, Nigel, self-growth. I am like nowadays. I'm also like, I see no problem in recreational use if you do it with a harm reduction in a harm reduction manner. No problem if you're informed, have an informed decision to take psychedelics, for example, on a festival or on a party, and that you are mature enough. And I would really recommend to be experienced enough. Yeah, don't start doing psychedelics at a rave or something. That's just too risky, too dangerous. But it is possible, and I myself did also good experiences with it. But I did it after I was very mature with it. So, and also for these clients that want to do recreational experiences, it's also suitable to do preparation and integration. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a big process and change your values or something in integration as the client wants. Yeah. You can just look at how it changed your, I don't know, your view on having fun or something. It's important that we look what the client really wants, and to do harm reduction in first and foremost, and then to help with deeper processes if that's wanted.
Yeah, and that's a point we make in the paper quite early. It's like, well, here are roughly 3 domains of how psychedelics can be used recreationally, right? And a lot of people do that, and that's fine, but that has nothing to do with what we are writing the paper about, right? There's the clinical aspect, where healing, treating, fixing, helping make pain go away, help to really people, like that's clinical applications. That's, for me, I got nothing to do with coaching. I know that the line gets more and more blurry, but for me, really, it's about what Nigel mentioned earlier, the betterment of well people. Who coined that term again?
Bob Jesser, I believe,
yes,
from
John Hopkins.
From John Hopkins.
Yeah,
Jesser. I don't know how you pronounce your name. Sorry, Bob.
So, there's recreational, there's clinical applications, and this really is to help people who are, in coaching, we often say the clients are resourceful and whole, creative, resourceful, and whole. So these are not people that are suffering. These are not people that are in a deep hole. These are not people that are in need of healing necessarily. I mean, everybody could do with some healing on this, that, or the other aspect of their life. Maybe some of this needs to take place in order for someone to move forward. But coaching clients, generally, they're not suffering. Generally, they're not coming because they're in a hole and they really need to get out of it. Generally, then they're not feeling like they can't cope with life anymore and they really need an intervention. For me, that's what I'm getting really excited about, and that's not really out there. There's so many people seeking psychedelic experiences, and they're not seeking psychedelic experiences. What they're seeking is some answers to big questions, or they're seeking fulfilling some sort of desire, or feeling maybe a bit stuck. But generally they're quite able, and they're able to think, and they're in tune with themselves, that they're okay. But they want to grow, they want to expand, they want to learn, they want to have these insights. So maybe just kind of sample the experience. And then, as in coaching, usually coaches work with some sort of intention, some sort of goal, some sort of desire. Coaching clients, usually they want to move, they want to progress, they want to go somewhere or be someone that they're currently not. There's a gap between the desire and the current reality. And that's helpful to work with. What a wonderful way to enter and then use a tool like psychedelics to just completely shake up the snow globe and be able to move outside of your usual way of thinking and your usual patterns, but radically. I mean, many coaches do this work, right? Take a client out of their frame of reference, offer them a question that just challenges their way of thinking. Ask someone who's very cognitive about their experiences in their body and their sensations that are coming up as they're thinking about this thing. That shifts, that disrupts someone's patterns. And in that kind of process, new meanings, new answers, new pathways open up. And when we throw psychedelics into that, that's that, but supersized, which comes with risks, obviously, that we need to manage. But this is why it's so potent, because it radically shifts your thinking, because you don't have any more access to your normal way of thinking. And in a non-psychedelic coaching session, people can always slip back, right? You ask somebody how they feel, and they give you a cognitive concept of how they feel. It's like, yeah, but what does it actually feel like? What's the experience of you being sad? Oh, yeah, well, I cry a lot. Yeah, but that doesn't really, what's that like? And, they keep slipping into their normal way of thinking, which makes sense. And with psychedelics, there's just no longer any access to that, which can feel scary, but that's also why it's so potent. So what a cool way of experiencing the world, even if it's for a moment, and if it's well held and it's safely done, and there's the right kind of support, and you have some work preparing for that experience, and then you have already set up space to integrate it, and you've thought about how you can keep yourself safe and how you can make the most out of this. I mean, what a wonderful framework to help normal people grow and expand. So yeah, I'm a fan, I got to admit. So part of the challenge in this paper was to stay unbiased and really challenge each other's assumption about, is it really a beneficial partnership? So there's still a question mark. But I guess if you read the paper, you probably get a good sense that the authors really do believe in this. But I really tried to stay balanced and consider a critique and really open up the ethical questions. And hopefully we've done a good job. It's a bit difficult to say when you're so close to the paper, So hopefully we've successfully managed to approach the topic with a bit of poise, with a bit of balanced view. And I'm so curious where people are going to take this.
About challenges and having an eye on the timing, I would be very interested in the challenges. So what did you run against maybe by writing it? So what have been like disagreements, or were there topics where you really had to discuss about if they're taken into the white paper or not, or like having a look behind the scenes, how the writing has been for you three?
I'd love to hear from Marcel and Nigel, because I'm imagining it was a bit difficult to come into a paper that was kind of already conceptualized in Yannick's head.
Yeah, I think we've touched a bit upon that today in that whole discussion of the role of the coach in all of this. So what are we actually talking about? And I know we had quite some discussions around that as to whether we're keeping it on the role of in the kind of the traditional sense of a coach, or also then going into this role of coach and guide. Mm-hmm. And I think we've come at a good compromise, I think. So I think that was maybe something that was compromised rather than that didn't make it, for example. I'm struggling to even remember now what we also went into more depth that we had to take out. Marcel, is there anything that you can remember?
I mean, we had quite a lot. Where
did the 6,000 words go?
I mean, yeah, it was at the beginning, it was so hard to have all these documents to be considered and then to integrate it in one document. And it was far beyond being concise. And it was so hard for me to have, how many pages was it? 30 or 40, I don't know. So many pages, and then to have the red line in your mind. What was our basic argument and how is it unfolded? And then we had so many repetitions. Yeah, 2 or 3 times, like kind of the same from slightly different perspective. This was very hard. And then it was like a big relief for me, I think for us all, when we had our editor, our professional editor, that had a unbiased view on that, and that condensed our paper to how many words is it now, Yannick?
6,000 plus references.
6,000. Yeah, and without the editor, we were like lost. Because we were so much involved into it, and like we read something different than somebody from outside. So also, this really made a change for me when we had a concise paper. Then it was way more easy to work.
Yeah. Also, I just really hate editing. It's every time, well, not every time, but like a lot of times when I started editing, I just added more words instead of taking them off, and I'm like, that's not the point here. Just to pick up on that section, I remember, Marcel, you wrote a section on brain plasticity and just the neurological processes that are at work. And in the end, it was difficult to cut that, because partly I do want to also educate it, but that's other papers are written about that. So there was a lot more around positive psychology and the kind of conceptual view of that. There was a lot more about what is coaching, what is the range of coaching, and these sections had to be significantly shortened. So really just taking the essence out of that and try to put a few sentences around it. We could have written pages on microdosing, and in the end, it wouldn't have been a complete paper if we didn't acknowledge that that's taking place. But there's so little that we actually know from research that it was difficult to write more about it. I mean, it was easy to write more about it, but it was difficult to really justify for it to take so much space in the paper. One element was where I quite softened, is that if I would have written this paper alone, I would have drawn much clearer lines to the kind of healing-oriented coaching approaches, because many coaches do operate in the healing space. If somebody comes to me and I get the sense that they want to heal some part of themselves, then I don't think working with me is the right way, right? The coaching process can be healing. The experience can be healing in itself, and integrating the experience can be a healing process. But if somebody comes with the intention of healing some part, then I don't think, for me, that would be coaching. And there I softened up because of the exchange with the community and also the two of you, right? Nigel, that element of the coach as sitter, I would have not included that. But, conversations between us and also conversations just checking into what are coaches in the field actually doing. And many of them do not want to be out in the open, but some of them have really talked to us about what they do. And many of them do hold space during. And they also sit, and some of them also guide. So I think it was important that that section is in there. If it was only me, then that would have probably not been in there. So I'm grateful for that kind of exchange.
Yeah, I also think the topic of microdosing, it's one of the hottest topics still in the psychedelic field, both theoretical and practical. And we could write a lot about it, but it's so controversial. And we also had some discussions about it, how to write it. And the first draft was something like, microdosing is something like drinking a glass of wine. It doesn't hurt anybody. It's not so, it cannot be harmful. And some evidence is there that it's not more than an expectancy effect. But I was more like, no. It's way more risky. And we should, like, it can be interpreted very different when you read it. And so we had discussions about that, and I came up with there's really some danger in microdosing, like to get the right dose of a substance. It's with LSD, it can be very problematic, because you're in a microgram area, and so you have to be careful about that. And it was just, there were so many things to work on, and we kept the microdosing section to very short. And I think it should be a continuation of the paper, maybe from us or another group.
Maybe another group.
Somebody else can do
talk
it.
on microdosing explicitly. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. So I have again an eye on the timing, because I know, Nigel, you have to leave on point. So I think we go to the end of this session now. So normally we ask like quick fire questions, and one quick fire question is about, is there any books or anything that you can recommend? But I would suppose, like, when the paper is out, just have a look at the very long literature list, and I think there is a lot of very valuable literature in there. If you
not only scientific literature but also practical literature, as Psychedelic Explorer's Guide from Pedlingham, or Consciousness Medicine, so very practical.
And so I think it's a good source in general.
I think we could probably invite people to review the current draft of the paper before it gets published. I would be keen to know, get some comments, before we submit it, or even after we've submitted. There's still space to make some changes. So I'd say if anybody doesn't want to wait until the paper is published and has maybe a valuable perspective on this, maybe there could be some sort of early access. Maybe I'll check with the editors. but also maybe it's better to ask for forgiveness than for permission. But I think the review process could be a great way to give some people access to this. Because it could take a while until it's published. You never know, right? They might come back with some comments and then we send it back, and it might take 2 months for them to respond to our comments. It's not uncommon that there's like 3, 4, 5 rounds of feedback and revisions.
But how would it then be possible? Like, how is it possible to get a preview of the white paper? Is it just reaching out to you or to one of you?
Reach out to one of us. I'm happy for people to reach out to me at 42, the number 42 at existential.coach. Or, there's contact ways through the podcast. So I'm sure you'll find a space to get in touch with us. We're also all Googleable, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we hold it like that. Perfect. So yeah, I would say thank you very much, all of you, for being here, for making this possible and happening. And I think it was a very fruitful discussion. And thank you for being so open for all the questions and really diving into it and to give a short, overview about what the white paper will be. So for me, it was really interesting to read. And I'm very curious about what the end product will look like.
Me too. And hey, lots and lots of love, Nigel, Marcel. I could have done it without you, but I probably wouldn't have. So I'd say this paper probably wouldn't exist, or it wouldn't exist for a very long time if it wasn't for you. So thank you for your commitment beyond reverting out of mind back into the interest group, and to keep going. This is the working group that has kept going. So, thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a ride, but it's been very pleasurable. And I think what makes it so important doing these sorts of things is also building this community of practitioners that are working in this space. That it's so important that we do come together in collaboration to develop this space together, to learn from each other, to grow together. So for me, that's been a very valuable component as part of this process.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also, thank you to you, Yannick, for your, I would say, leadership on this project, because I couldn't write the paper, or maybe us, without your dedication to it, to make an outline and to deal with the journals and to make some like really central contributions to it. Yeah. And so for me, it was a overall very nice experience. It's my first paper that I publish, and it's again, it's so nice to see it in front of me. And even if there are some revision rounds still, like we have a concise paper, and it's so nice for me and rewarding to see it in front of me. Thank you. You both.
Awesome. Enough of sucking each other's dicks.
Yeah.
Have a great rest of the day. See you soon.
I hope that bit makes the last edit.
Well, happy ending. Okay, lots of love.
Yeah.
I'll see you guys soon. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.